Georgia O'Connor here. Big up Julius. Ring IQ. Welcome to the relay.
Welcome to the relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this per tweet from Michael Benson. Claressa Shields versus Savannah Marshall rematch is not going to happen next. Ben Shalom has indicated Marshall has activated her rematch clause, but Shalom has said his plan is for her to have 1 or 2 fights back before facing Claressa again.
Solid plan.
Not but a few days ago, it was a very different story. Savannah Marshall, the former WBO middleweight champion, appeared on the Sky Sports Network and indicated that she had activated her rematch clause. And we talked about what she would need to do differently in a second fight that she didn't do in the first. How she would need to better manage the distance to optimize her power. Being the naturally taller, longer, and in many ways stronger fighter, being so close to Claressa.
Stronger puncher, at least. Claressa Shields is durable and she's an excellent boxer, but she's not a big puncher.
Savannah, because of those long arms, those long levers, she can't do the same damage up close to Claressa that she could if she had a bit more space, and she's got to manage it. But it appears that she won't be facing Claressa for the second time straight away, so who could she end up facing? Well, there are a variety of options at or around these weights. She could end up facing former IBF champion at junior middleweight, Marie-Eve Dicaire of Canada. She just fought on the Sky Sports Network. She could fight her. She could fight former IBF champion, their super middleweight, Eline Cedar-Ruz. She could fight former middleweight champion, unified middleweight champion, Christina Hammer, who hasn't been doing a heck of a lot lately.
She hasn't been very active.
She could fight Marisela Cornejo. She could fight unbeaten up-and-comer from the United States, Jean Deja Green.
Or unbeaten up-and-comer Raquel Miller from the West Coast.
There are actually a few girls still out there that Savannah Marshall can keep busy with, and what would be interesting fights in the build-up of a Claressa Shields rematch. The question is, what does Claressa do in the mean and between time? What does she do for the next 2 fights? They were playing with the idea of Shields versus Jonas, a fight that I'm not a fan of, but if Claressa's not fighting Savannah for a second time, she could very well end up fighting.
I really don't like that fight for Natasha.
But Natasha Jonas isn't one to shy away from a challenge. That's why I'm such a big fan of her.
I think she would be in over her head with Claressa. She'd be biting off more than she could chew, but that is an idea they were bouncing around not but a few days ago.
A few days later, that's an idea that we have to entertain if Shields versus Marshall isn't next.
Down there in the women's lightweight division, it appears that Estelle Mosley had to deliver some unfortunate news.
The Olympic gold medalist posted this to her social media, and it reads, "I was happy to fight in Kinshasa, a mythical city, boxing history, the land of my ancestors. Unfortunately, due to reasons beyond my control, this will not be possible. The federation failed to meet the requirements for setting up such a championship. Luckily, I have a fire team, and what's not done today will soon be made up for early 2023. Something to give the hype about what this year will be like. We'll give you an update soon. In the meantime, I am training hard."
Estelle was supposed to be in action today opposite the ring, Anisha Basheel. You might be familiar with that name. That's the same Anisha Basheel that shared the ring with Chantel Cameron some years ago.
Some years later, she was supposed to fight Estelle in defense of Estelle's IBO title.
You wonder if Estelle is still working with the people over there at Pro Bellum. She's fought at least once under the banner, but this doesn't appear to have been a Pro Bellum show set to go down in Kinshasa.
The curious case of Estelle Mosley, who's got a better amateur background than most. She's an Olympic gold medalist, and you would have expected that by now she would have made a bigger splash in the sport. But for the most part, she has been out there somewhere on the outskirts. You know, her career is a stop-and-start career, the same way that Sofia Okolie of Russia.
Another Olympian and another one of Katie Taylor's amateur rivals, Sofia Okolie of Russia, Olympic silver medalist.
Talked about her in my previous video and how you would have expected more. Sofia Okolie having debuted in 2016, the same year as Katie Taylor, the same year as Claressa Shields. Sofia is not having the same success as a professional that she had as an amateur. In many ways, that rings true of Estelle as well. You would have expected more from an Olympic gold medalist.
You know, with Sofia, it's about activity or the lack thereof, whereas with Estelle, It's not so much about activity, but the quality of her competition.
She's due for a step up in class, a step up in competition. That's the biggest hang up with her, and you would have thought that by now, given her amateur background, they'd move her on to more interesting opponents, and she would have made a bigger splash in the sport as a result. Now that this Anisha Basheel fight has fallen through, you wonder that the people at Top Rank won't get in contact with her.
Michaela Mayer's on the rebound. Michaela Mayer is on the comeback trail, and rumor has it that her next fight will take place north of the super featherweight division up there at lightweight.
Mayer versus Mosley has a nice ring to it. Dubois versus Mosley does as well. Young Caroline Dubois, yet another amateur standout. An Olympian like Estelle. She didn't win the gold like Estelle,
But comparatively, she seems to have made a bigger splash, left a lasting impression on anyone who's seen her in action. She has all the makings of a future pound-for-pound fighter.
That's the kind of matchmaking we haven't been seeing from Estelle Mosley, and it's about time because she's got 10 wins, no losses, and no draws.
One knockout. Only one recorded knockout. She saw action at least once, just once earlier this year, and just once last year.
I'll be honest with you, it's a career that's lacking direction. What is she building towards? Certainly not an alphabet title, because if she wanted to, given her background, she could have fought for one by now.
So the Anisha Basheel fight has fallen through, and she says she's set to return to action early next year.
And let's see if next year doesn't turn out to be a more productive year for Estelle than this one was. In men's cruiserweight news, per a tweet from Michael Benson, the WBO have announced that Lawrence Okolie versus David Light is now a done deal, with an agreement reached for Okolie's mandatory defense of his WBO cruiserweight world title to take place on a March 11th boxer show in London.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It appears that Lawrence Okolie has successfully crossed over, migrated from Matchroom over to Sky Sports and Boxer, as a result of Boxer offering him more money.
We've already been all through this, in so many words. Boxer offered Lawrence Okolie a dollar amount that Eddie Hearn didn't feel reflected Lawrence Okolie's commercial value, i.e., a dollar amount that Matchroom was unwilling to match.
The issue was that, according to Eddie, Lawrence still owed them a fight, though given the tumultuous relationship they were having, the rift between them, I personally thought they should just cut the guy loose.
Even if he does owe you a fight, do you want to spend Matchroom's resources and their dollars promoting it, knowing that he's just going to cross over to Boxer anyway?
I understand it sets a bad precedent to release the guy, if they did in fact release the guy, which is subject to some speculation. Is it the way that Lawrence says it was? That his Matchroom contract was up?
That he was a network and promotional free agent, free to cross over and field offers from other promotional outfits? Is it the way that Lawrence says it was? Or is it the way that Eddie says it was, and he still owed them a fight, but they decided to cut him loose anyway? Let him go. It's more trouble than he's worth.
Like I said, we've already been all through this. Eddie Hearn said that Lawrence was still under contract and he still owed them a fight. And if it's the way that Eddie says it was, and
things having worked out the way that they did, it's possible that Matchroom just decided to cut him loose and let him go because it's more trouble than he's actually worth to Matchroom. Or it's possible that Ben Shalom bought out his contract.
remember, Lawrence Okolie said that the people at Matchroom asked him for 500 large, 500 grand.
Where did that dollar amount, where did that figure come from? Where Lawrence says that Eddie asked him for $500,000, Eddie says they didn't ask Lawrence for anything.
I'm sure that those answers will come in the coming days and weeks and months. What led to this point?
Under what circumstances exactly was this reconciliation, this resolution reached?
I'm no bleeding heart, I don't pull out the violin and start playing it every time a fighter says that he's being mistreated by a promoter, because look at what Teofimo said about Top Rank.
He turned a mountain into a molehill, overpricing himself, overstating his value ahead of what was supposed to be the George Kambosos fight, and that drug out for all of a year. It blew up in his face.
He said Top Rank wasn't treating him right. He said that Matchroom and DAZN, they set him up.
He said a lot of things in order to avoid his comeuppance, because had he adhered to Top Rank's instructions and did the fight at their price, he would have gotten that out of the way already and moved on to something bigger.
I'm no bleeding heart. I don't pull out the violin every time a fighter says that they're being mistreated. Sometimes that's the case. sometimes it isn't.
You have to wonder if it took this long for Lawrence Okolie to effectively migrate from Matchroom over to
Sky
Boxer. Was there not something to what Eddie Hearn was saying? That he was still under contract, and he did still owe them a fight, and the reason it's taken this long for him to cross over is because Eddie was telling the truth. If he wasn't, you would have crossed over by now.
Lawrence Okolie only fought once this year, just once, and that was way back there in February. The majority of the year, he's been out of action.
If he really were a network and promotional free agent, then why would it have taken this long for him to effectively migrate from Matchroom over to Sky?
If he really were out of contract, he would have been able to make his Boxer debut before this year was out. As it stands, he's not set to make that debut till the first quarter of next year, the tail end of it. In March. There has to be a reason for that.
The people at Sky Sports and Boxer intend to make Lawrence the face of boxing on their platform, the face of boxing on their network, whilst sticking it to Eddie Hearn. Though you have to wonder if Ben Shalom can promote this fighter better than Eddie Hearn did.
Because for better or worse, that is what Ben is attempting to do. And Boxer, who are making a conscious investment in the men's cruiserweight division. They've got unbeaten Richard Riakporhe. They've got Chris Billum-Smith. Now they've got Lawrence Okolie.
Matchroom has no stake in the men's cruiserweight division anymore. It's an open book for Ben Shalom, Boxer, and Sky Sports, a major platform in the United Kingdom.
That's an advantage.
In order to really stick it to Eddie Hearn, Ben Shalom's promotional rival and platform rival, he's got to try and promote Lawrence better than Eddie did. Deliver to Lawrence the kind of fights that Eddie didn't deliver to Lawrence during his tenure at Matchroom. That could be a unification match with J.O. Pataya, Arsene Goulamarian, Lunga Makabu.
Irrespective of why, those unification matches didn't happen during Lawrence's tenure at Matchroom. But if Ben Shalom can now make them happen on Sky, well, that's a good look for him. That's a good look for Lawrence.
Can he now do with Lawrence Okolie what he has already done with Natasha Jonas?
The cruiserweight division is not a political division, at least not right now.
Not anymore. Maybe it was back when Lawrence was still with Matchroom. But by all accounts, it seems that Ben Shalom and Boxer, they've got the run of the place with virtually no competition, none domestically.
Matchroom ain't got a stake in the cruiserweight division anymore.
They offered Lawrence a lot of money in order to entice him to come over. And for what it's worth, it actually worked. But that's very different from actually turning him into a big marquee attraction, a big star in all the ways that he hasn't been a big star during his tenure at Matchroom. And that's where the true measure of Ben Shalom's ability to promote will be decided.
You got him to cross over.
That's really only half the job, though. With Eddie Hearn and Matchroom out of the picture, it's up to you now to promote this fighter and turn him into a bigger attraction than he has been.
Lawrence's methodology, the overall aesthetic of a Lawrence Okolie fight, has been described as less than entertaining in some instances.
We'll see if he don't turn over a new leaf now that he's on Sky Sports and Boxer and making the kind of money that he wants to make. In men's heavyweight news, Hall of Famer Teddy Atlas does not expect Anthony Joshua to ever entertain a Joe Joyce showdown.
Jesus Christ. Joe Joyce beats a guy that Anthony Joshua beat fucking years ago. All of a sudden, he's the boogity man.
Never mind that he was beaten by both Anthony, Dillian, arguably beaten by Derek Chisora in their first fight. As soon as Joe touches him,
Oh, that's it. Joe's the boogeyman.
there's no way on God's earth, no way, that Joshua and his promoter are getting within. They wouldn't get within a 10-foot pole of Joe Joyce in that boxing ring. No way, Atlas stated on the Fight Podcast. I've been saying this guy, Joyce, is a player. This guy's got a chin of granite. He reminds me of a younger Foreman. Although I gotta be careful with that because he is 38 years old. But Joyce reminds me of George Foreman when he was in his first life before the comeback.
This isn't about downplaying Joe Joyce, you know. I like smoking Joe Joyce. I picked him to stop Joseph Parker. This isn't about downplaying Joe.
This is about how guys like Teddy like to downplay Anthony Joshua, whilst hyping up fighters who have accomplished less. far less than Anthony has.
Bear in mind, Joe Joyce is a lot older than Anthony is. He's pushing 40.
You'd never think that he were a former unified champion, a two-time heavyweight champion, which is an even shorter list.
You'd never think that he beat more top 10 fighters consecutively than both Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury based on how guys like Teddy talk about him.
How they talk him down and talk up Joe Joyce. Joe Joyce, who I like, but let's not kid ourselves. It's Joe that has all the catching up to do here. Joe, who Teddy says, just a big guy, a ponderous puncher, a concussive puncher, not a snappy puncher, just a blunting type puncher that does damage. He's big, he's relentless. As I said, he's got a great heart, great chin so far. I've been calling for this guy to be in there instead of some of the other guys to get the shot.
He says they won't come within 10 feet of this guy.
Teddy's not an outsider. You know, he's no spectator in what is this spectator sport, not just. He knows the business. And if you know that Anthony Joshua is worth a lot more money than a Joe Joyce, what you really have to ask yourself is Frank Warren, Woody, I should say.
You know, for the longest time, when Anthony Joshua versus Deontay Wilder was still a hot topic, when that was a conversation, a lot of people in the American media, guys like Teddy, they didn't want to admit that Anthony Joshua was just worth a lot more money than Deontay. And yes, that's a factor.
Yes!
What are you, stupid? This is prize fighting. You ought to know how this works. If Anthony is worth a lot more money than Joe, irrespective of how you think the fight goes, the onus is for Joe to cross over to a Matchroom in DAZN, not to send Anthony over to Queensbury and BT.
For how fucking long have people been in denial about this? Yes, Anthony was worth more money than Deontay, and currently, even off consecutive losses, he's still worth more money than Joe.
Well, you paint this picture that both Eddie Hearn and Anthony Joshua are, for any reason, shaking in their boots over Joe Joyce. You make it sound like it boils down to choice when what it really boils down to is politics.
Joe Blow on the street might not know that, but you're in the business, or you used to be. You should know better.
But then again, you're more of a UFC guy these days than a boxing guy. In the same way that people decide that they're not going to like a fighter for whatever reason, they make that decision within themselves. That's the same way that Teddy Atlas has decided that he's going to adore Joe Joyce. He's even likening him to George Foreman.
I've heard that association made on several occasions, but that's not the point. The point is,
It's recency bias. The same kind of recency bias you see among the Gentiles is what you're currently seeing with Teddy.
it's recency bias.
It makes it sound like Anthony never fought a puncher before.
What was Dillian White? What was Olympic gold medalist Alexander Povetkin, well known for being one of the more dangerous and crafty boxers in the entire division for years?
What was Vladimir Klitschko? Anthony fought him when he was just 17-0.
What was Andy Ruiz? He fought him 2 times. The guy who just dropped Luis Ortiz 2 times? Anthony fought him 2 times.
But the guys like Teddy, the second fight doesn't count.
What it seems like, he makes it sound like Anthony's never shared the ring with a puncher before.
Joshua versus Joyce doesn't boil down to choice, it boils down to politics. Frank is not about to send his prized stallion over to DAZN, even though in order to do that fight, you would have to, because Anthony's worth more money than Joe.